So this is pretty exciting. I think everyone here has probably heard ChatGPT mentioned far too many times. I had a slightly surreal moment the other day when I was at the self-checkout and the person next to me was talking about large language models. So that is very strange for someone that spent a number of years in this space, that it's now very clearly in the public and popular vernacular. It's odd, to be honest. So we've got an amazing panel today to really dig into, I think, what is on a lot of people's minds is this hype? Is it reality? Is it the end of the world as we know it? So we'll try and get through all of those. But before we kick off, I want to introduce the Queensland AI Hub to the group. And for those of you that don't know about us, we'll go through a little bit about what the Hub's been up to. Just before I do, I might get Emmy, Mayu, and Roman to come up and just wave. They're from the Queensland AI Hub, so if you have any questions about what we're doing, what we're up to, how you can get involved, please come and grab them over a beer later. Hopefully many of you know them already. So if we can just jump on to the next slide, please. Oh, I have the clicker. There we go. Technology. I do not have the clicker. It's just not on. Roman, do you want to click? It's only a couple of slides. We'll be all right. So basically, the Queensland AI Hub was set up in 2020. It's kind of hard to set up a hub in the middle of a lockdown, but we gave it a good crack. So we've been going a couple of years, and really what we're trying to do is connect Queensland's AI industry to make us globally competitive. Obviously, there's been a lot of people working in AI in Queensland for a number of years. The AI Hub actually sort of formed out of a meetup, which goes back to 2016, even 2015. Michael's here, he'll remember, kinda. But we're fortunate enough to have the Queensland government lean in and help fund a dedicated team and body to the AI industry, which is fabulous. So really, we want to accelerate adoption, capability, improve productivity through technology, support job growth and economic growth in Queensland. That means that we work both with AI consumers, people adopting AI into their businesses or into their lives, but also, of course, AI creators, startups, etc. Next slide, please. So what are we doing? We've got a bit on. Actually, got heaps on. So kicking off, we've got a Launch AI accelerator, which is a pre-accelerator, which is really helping very, very early stage founders get clear on what they want to do and getting ready to launch a business in AI. We have our regional chapters program, so we're connecting with a number of regions and looking to expand this program, but it's Cairns, Mackay, Bundaberg and Toowoomba, and hopefully some of them are on the live stream. It's probably just a note as well, we are on YouTube live streaming, so if you're going to ask a question that you don't want streamed on the internet, don't, but also you should live your life by that these days. We're also launching our MoveX accelerator, which is going to take 10 startups. We're focused on transport, energy, logistics, supply chain, and transit technologies. So a super interesting space, very relevant to us here in Queensland. And then, which is really, really exciting for me, we've got an AI summit coming up, so stay tuned. We'll go to the next slide, please, Roman. You can also sign up to our AI-generated newsletter. We thought, A, we don't like doing any work, and B, we should probably use AI if we're the AI Hub. So welcome to Abridge AI News. We have 2,500 strong on the, and hopefully a couple hundred more today. But Max Vision, which, used to be, before he got divorced, was Max Kelson. It's very progressive. And here he is. This is Max Vision, generated by AI, with a script generated by AI, talking about his AI-generated newsletter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Max Vision, your new artificial newsletter editor created by Queensland AI Hub. I'm looking forward to sharing with you the latest and most important news about AI and ML. I would like to show you how I was created and even share my source code with you at the end of this short presentation. One of the Queensland AI Hub purposes is to be the source of the information about AI and ML and share it with our community. The team at QLD AI Hub thought hard about how to add value to our members, save their time, and introduce them to ChatGPT. We discovered some interesting facts. It takes a lot of time to go through news articles. On average, there are between 50 and 70 highly relevant news articles published a day on the AI and ML topics by major news outlets. It takes 5 to 6 minutes to read each article on average. That is between 4 and 7 hours of reading each day if you want to be up to date with the latest information. What if you could only spend between 5 and 10 minutes per week to get the most important information for the entire week? Meet a Bridge AI newsletter. My parents at Queensland AI Hub utilized a few technologies to build the first fully automated newsletter editor powered by AI. They gave me the name Max Vision in reference to the Avengers artificial intelligence character called Vision. In addition, it also a short version for maximum vision, which is the ability to see things clearly from the long distance away by utilizing some form of technology. My code was written in JavaScript utilizing the Node.js environment. Google News was used as a primary source of up-to-date and diverse news from major news outlets. The Trafalatra package helped us to extract article content and metadata from the news links provided by Google News. Believe it or not, content extraction is a real hard problem to solve given the semi-structured nature of HTML and the large amount of noise caused by recurring elements such as headers, footers, links, blogroll, etc. ChatGPT provided article summarization, title generation, and picking a handful of the most important articles to be sent to you. ChatGPT doesn't have an API yet, so the unofficial package that relies on reverse engineering was used to interact with ChatGPT. MailChimp integration is used for email delivery. Another fun fact, parts of my code were generated by ChatGPT as well as this presentation. The process to generate a newsletter consists of 3 steps. 1. Collect news articles through the week. 2. On Fridays, we run a script that goes through all collected articles and picks the most important ones. 3. The articles are converted into a newsletter template and saved into MailChimp as a draft ready to be reviewed by my human colleagues. As you would imagine, I am not just a pretty AI-generated face and voice. Although, today I am trying to look my extra best for my beloved audience, like putting on a good suit, hitting my AI gym in the morning to reduce the mean absolute error of my model and get those perfect AI abs. You should also know that most days of the week I run naked. Here, have a look. This is me collecting the articles. As you can see, I am not perfect. But who is? I am slow at the best of times. Occasionally throw tantrums in the form of error exceptions, or completely deny talking because apparently the servers are too busy. Occasionally, I practice ancient gibberish language with my colleagues at AI Hub, and from time to time get accused of taking over the world or the jobs of my human friends. Here is me reading through hundreds of news summaries and picking the best few articles for you. And this is me again generating a newsletter. Despite my flaws, I feel the newsletter looks and reads pretty good and the time saving is evident. As famous ChatGPT once said, "No one is perfect, and it's through our imperfections and missteps that we have the opportunity to learn, grow, and become better versions of ourselves." Thank you, and I hope to connect with you all via a Bridge AI newsletter. Sincerely yours, Max Vision. Hi, everyone.
And because it's a post-COVID world, you can sign up directly on a QR code, the great winner of COVID. All right, let's get into why we're here. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Nick. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Max Kelson, and I'm the chair of the Queensland AI Hub. With me today, I have 3 epic panelists. We caught up before and had a chat about what we're going to talk about. The simple questions I had became a lot of scroll because there's many things that we want to cover tonight. So I'm not going to do them the disservice of trying to introduce them, and I'm going to get them to introduce themselves when we get to them. But what I thought we might do is start with you, Marcus, is to start with a general overview of how the hell ChatGPT works. And you've got 2 minutes.
Thanks. Do I do my intro first or just explain? Okay. Yeah, g'day everyone. My name's Marcus. I'm Associate Professor at UQ in Computer Science, and I've been an AI researcher and teacher for 20 odd years. And wow, things have changed in AI over the last 20 years. So yeah, I guess if I think the best way maybe to think about how it's working I would say it's a big neural network model, something called a transformer. I guess some people might know what this is and other people might not. But it's an enormous neural network trained on an enormous amount of data on an enormous computer. And it's a network that works on sequence data. Okay, and text is a sequence of strings and words and characters, and apparently it's very good at that. So it's a large language model, which I roughly think of as something that can model the statistics of a language and the way that words come together in a language and the order that they come in together. I think a good analogy maybe is just predictive text on people's phones, right? So everybody's familiar with your phone suggesting the next word you should put in your text. I think of ChatGPT as a model that is sort of like that, but many orders of magnitude more powerful. It's not searching the web, it's generating what it thinks the next word should be, and then what the next one should be, given that all the ones that have come before it. And I reckon I'm out of time.
I reckon that's pretty good.
Did I pass?
Yeah, you did. Thanks, Marcus. Maybe just a show of hands of how many people here have used ChatGPT. All right, everyone, that's all. You haven't? The door's over there, mate. How many of you have used it in the last week? Fucking hell. How many of you have used it for your job? Belinda, you're in risk. What do we think about, how do we think about how ChatGPT and technologies like it are already being used in the workplace? And should employers or businesses be thinking about different ways to manage this technology, or is it an opportunity?
Thanks. I'll do a quick intro as well. Hi, everyone. I'm Belinda Sippy. I work at Deloitte, so work in consulting. All my views are my own here. Little disclaimer. So I work in the risk advisory practice at Deloitte, specifically in analytics, in the risk and regulatory compliance area. This is a big question to be asking yourself before you put anything confidential or personal into that chat function. I think, we're thinking a lot about the risk around this technology, but there is also, when there's something so disruptive, that brings opportunity. So it's how do we understand the risks, manage the risks, advise our clients what these risks are and how to, navigate that complex landscape, but also how to take, make the most of the opportunities that, disruption brings.
Peter, thinking about the opportunity for startups and the innovation ecosystem, what are you seeing, pop out of the ChatGPT?
Okay, so I'll introduce myself first as well. So my name's Peter Laurie. I do a lot of stuff around the startup ecosystem, basically across Australia, but mainly out of Brisbane and also a fair bit into Melbourne last year in a role that, sorry? Yep, how's that? Is that good? People at the back? So I need some volume or? Right, okay. Sorry? The volume's dropped. Okay, right. Now we're good. Is that right? Yep, right. So I do a lot of stuff around the startup ecosystem. I'm an electrical engineer by training, but never worked as one because this thing called the internet turned up, burned my fingers a lot less on the internet. So I've been doing software development for the last 30 odd years. About halfway through that, I went and did an MBA to work out what went wrong with the businesses I was working with. Turns out it was invoicing. But so after we solved that, I've spent the last 10, 12, a bit longer years in working with startups and new ventures. So that's where I live. So to the question, it's around, well, anybody who's, it used to be that if you were going to write a book, if you're going to buy a book, actually, if you're going to buy a book, you'd look at how thick it was, and you'd think, it takes a lot of effort to publish a book, right? And it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of people looking at that, and it better be right, because it costs a lot of money to make it. Okay? So the opportunity that something like ChatGPT brings now is that it costs basically nothing to do that. Right? So any business that's based around the weight of the document that they produce or the volume of text that they produce is now at risk. So that's in a short way of talking about the opportunity that something like this brings to startups or brings to new ventures or the opportunity that's there.
Belinda, you're a consultant.
Yeah, I think that was directed at me.
Yeah, was it thrown straight to you?
I think my comment on that is, I think quality over quantity is definitely like the approach that we would be, bringing to our clients. But also, I think everyone here has probably had to write a response to an essay question or write up a report when we all know, the outcomes and the findings within that report. So that's a time-consuming job. What if our time was spent, taking those learnings and, implementing a roadmap for, solving the problems that have arisen? So I think that's where the opportunity is.
Well, and the opportunity on that is that I'd happily just read the prompt to the thing that's generating it, rather than have to sort through all the stuff that's generated to work out what they were trying to say. So there's a big sort of change, hopefully, in the way that we consume what's produced, which is going to be a big part for how we actually move forward in this.
So you don't think being a prompt engineer is the future career for everyone in the audience?
Hopefully not. First up, from an engineering perspective, I'm offended. But also from a hopefully what will happen is everybody realizes that the quality of something is not dictated by how long it goes on or how beautiful its language is. It's actually what the quality of the stuff that comes in, exactly what Belinda was saying, the quality of what's there. So just give me the quality. I don't need the guff, right? So then that means that we don't associate a large document with a lot of work and a lot of thinking, right? We just look at the results of the thinking. So I think we've got questions at the end. Yeah.
We've got a lot of time for questions at the end, so we're really looking forward to the audience getting involved. But Marcus, let's go from prompt engineering to education. Now you have to assess students, I imagine.
Yes.
Is this an existential threat to how we assess students across education? How are you thinking about assessing students in, with ChatGPT being at their fingertips?
I don't want to say it's a threat, but it's definitely a disruptor. I mean, this thing's only been around for 3 months or so, right? Which is kind of our summer at uni. So you can be sure that there's been a lot of talk about this over the past few weeks as we try and figure out how on earth we're going to deal with this for the next semester, because the students are already onto this, they're already using this. I think it presents a huge challenge for assessment. In an area like computer science, it's not just generating text, it's generating code and generating markup or all sorts of things, anything that's structured as a text. So sometimes the old tech is good. I have to say I've gone a little bit back to the pen and paper exam for this semester, because you can't beat that. And thank goodness we're not in lockdown anymore, that we can actually examine students in a room physically. And other kinds of what we call identity verified assessment. So having students present demos of their work live to a tutor, question and answer. So there are things like that that I think most academics are thinking more about. Things like assignments, well, now it becomes a question of whether you ban or try and stop students from using it, or say, look, you can use it, but you need to reference, acknowledge your use, and maybe talk about what prompts you used and reflect on that. And so this makes things more complicated for us, but yeah, we definitely have a big challenge there.
IT 3002 prompt engineering coming your way. Belinda, I'm interested in your thoughts from a workforce point of view. You know, one observation would be that a lot of that grunt work, we were talking about report writing earlier, is done by the more junior team members in a group, and it's how they might learn a lot about their role if they're a young consultant or a lawyer or an accountant. Do you think that this runs the risk of leaving a gap in their career development, or do you think it's a great opportunity for young people coming out of uni?
I think we're probably going to have similar challenges as education. There's definitely an opportunity, but I think we're going to have to change the way we mentor and upskill our juniors. So, that sort of learning through repetition and time spent on something might change in how that looks. I think, our biggest asset in consulting is our people. And the asset is really how they problem solve and how they think. So we don't want to change the activities that they're doing that will impact how they develop those skills. So we probably need to assess it a little bit further as well.
To follow on from that, as a big business, particularly as a business like Deloitte with a long, rich history, I'm sure that you would think of that collective IP as sort of your competitive advantage. Is there a risk that technologies like this either water it down, or do you think it amplifies, that competitive advantage?
A little bit of both. I think there's opportunity here. I think all big organisations should be, if not already, thinking about this. There's reams of IP and collateral and artifacts and knowledge and experience that are locked into big organisations, and I think probably we don't do a great job at leveraging that currently, at scale. But technologies like this might help us change how we operate.
Peter, I'm keen to hear from you about the disruption and opportunity more broader than maybe just a consultancy that you see in the market.
So for me, very similar to the assessing part of it, is that there's a lot of value in when you're learning something and actually having to write it out and have a structured presentation, right? So go through, build up your case, do those things. I think that what we're going to run into is that people will not do that anymore, which means they won't structure their thinking anymore, especially if we continue to assess them by the volume of text or whether the HTML is correct or the code stuff that's happened. Certainly, I think there's advantage in, especially around, say, the software development aspect of it, where people that have their alternative to using GPT is to have nothing. GPT is going to win that argument pretty quickly, very similar to the no-code sort of tools, right? It's not perfect, it won't scale, it won't do all these things, but you know what? It kicks the crap out of nothing. So it's going to win, right? And what that does is it brings a lot more people through to participating. So now this isn't a new trend. This is the same thing that's happened forever. I mentioned books before. You got calculators. I remember having to have long arguments about being able to bring the right calculator to the engineering exams because I changed over to reverse Polish and I was screwed if I had to use a normal one. So I had to find a non-programmable reverse Polish notation one, right? But then you've got things like the book stuff that we talked about before, but newspapers and all those sorts of things, right? This is a normal sort of change that comes through with a technical disruption. And we tend to adjust to that. So the normal progression is it comes through from being a physics theoretical problem into being an engineering problem, and then it turns into a bit of an artisan problem, and then it turns into an art problem, right? So suddenly the hard thing that we had to do isn't that hard anymore. So now we find out where the hard part is. So I think there's opportunities everywhere around this, but I think a lot of them that we're all rushing to at the moment are tied to the fact that we've been doing something else in a very laborious way, and it's not laborious anymore. Right? So if the way we differentiated was around labour, or how fast we could do this thing that was very slow for people to do, that's a big disruption across the board that we have to do. And then also back to any sort of partnership structure. So the way I normally talk about it is where do senior partners come from? Well, junior partners. And where do junior partner comes from? Well, senior associates. And where do senior associates come from? Well, associates. And where do they come from? Well, the people that we take in. So we're about to see an erosion of that model that's coming through. So a trend that we might see is something similar to, say, what happened to Instagram. So they were 13 people bought for $1 billion, right? So we may end up with something similar happening to that in an accounting firm, right? So suddenly an accountancy wins a significant portion of the market with, a couple of hundred people globally, right? That's the sort of place that we're at. So the question that we've got and the question we talk about from a startup and a scale-up and a disruptive sort of area is, okay, well, where's the right place to be after that happens? And it won't be where we are now. So that's the general problem.
It's a great segue into where I wanted to go next, which is really to drill on the hype end of our conversation today and think about, where, we've talked a little bit about opportunities and risks, but I really want to cast ourselves forward a little bit, maybe 5 years, and ask the question of where each of the panelists see the technology and the greatest disruption being caused, and what are the things that you're really excited about? Like, where do you find the hype in the technology? Hey, Peter, you've got the mic, you can kick us off.
So for me, first up, it'll be something that's trained differently than GPT. So there's problems internally with GPT and how it works and how big it is and how much compute's required to do it. Now, you can argue that it used a lot of energy to do it, but the saving grace of that is that we can take the weights and we can apply it in other places. So transfer learning, we can do that. So we can share that, and I think we can get through that one socially. So it'll be something different. We'll still be living under Moore's law, so compute will be getting cheaper and cheaper. So the models are only going to get bigger and bigger, right? And we'll take in more information. I think there's a real opportunity around, especially in the machine learning part, where we move from something like offline learning, where we're training, to something that's online learning. So something that's going to learn from everything that's happening right now. So GPT, I think, is good to about, January this year or something. Don't ask any questions about 2022, or 23, sorry, right? So I think there's going to be something that'll come through there. But I'm much more interested in how we apply this and use this for things that we couldn't do before, as opposed to how we apply it for the things that we can do now.
Nick, did you say 5 years when you, just a second ago?
I chose an arbitrary number.
Okay.
Feel free to adjust it.
Well, I'm a bit risk averse about predicting things in AI in 5 years, and I think even 5 months maybe is a bit of a stretch these days. So, well, I don't know, crystal ball gazing. I think one possibility actually is that the models can get smaller and they can get more specialised. And I think there has been one in the biology research space, perhaps. Yeah, biology PT. So we're going to have a proliferation of these models. That's when Google and Microsoft figure out their issues, and a few more. But these models are currently too big for you to download and run on your laptop. But maybe there can be similar large language models trained on a more limited set of data for a particular domain, like business or biology, medicine, something like that. I think I see no reason why that can't happen, and those models will be good at that domain, but don't talk to them about inventing recipes or anything like that. Of course the general models will keep getting bigger. The compute demands will grow. Other ways of training, maybe. I can't make any predictions, really.
Fine. That's some fine fence sitting you've got there, Marcus. Thank you.
I have a couple of views. One is that, seeing these models and how fast they're moving, I'd love to see, like accurate and robust implementations of this kind of power to be pointed at good, to be used responsibly and ethically to solve some of our biggest problems. We're facing into, all sorts of crises in the world. Like, imagine in 5 years if it was starting to tackle some, climate issues. I'd love to see them being used for good. I'd also love to see, I love that it's disrupting the workforce. I know it's probably impacting, where I operate, but I'd rather be working less, playing more. I just love to see the efficiencies brought, into how we live and, tackling things like, work-life balance, mental health. There's lots of good that could come out of it in terms of the efficiencies and opportunities that, are out there.
I think we'll get to the bad later as we get into the reality bit. But staying a little bit on the hype, and I might say with you, Belinda, early in the week, we were discussing it earlier, but we saw that Bain & Company announced a partnership with OpenAI. Do you think that there is immediate opportunity, not in the 5-year window, but in the very near term to really change the consulting industry, like what it appears Bain and OpenAI are looking to do?
Yeah, I think there's always opportunity. It's like who will jump in and take those opportunities first. And what, I think everyone will be watching what that partnership looks like and, what else happens. So I think it's really watch this space for that.
Do you think there that there's a risk of the innovator's dilemma? And I probably want to throw over to Peter here at some point as well, which is to say that the business models of consulting, and this is picking up on Peter's point earlier about a 13-person accounting firm being bought for $1 billion, which I'd love to see. But do the business models restrict the ability to transform because it does fundamentally change the way that the way that the firm generates income? Not people hours, but IP or et cetera.
I think there'll be a transition. Like, back 50 years, it was really the people, the grunt power. Like, there's a lot of parts of consulting and we are leveraging assets and technology and, there's a lot going on. And as with anything that's new and disruptive, people do it, come unstuck. So they always need help to unravel. I see it changing, but, it's exciting.
Awesome. Peter, just throwing to you, has the world's most innovative company, Google, fallen into the innovator's dilemma?
Okay, so innovator's dilemma is a very different, very specific thing. So just a quick little business nerd thing. So you'll hear the term disruptive innovation. So it's different than what people normally talk about when they're talking about disruption. So disruptive innovation is one that has a low market entry. So it's at a very low price, such that the incumbents, so the people that are currently participating, don't care. Knock yourselves out, use it, don't worry, we don't even care about those customers. And what happens is through actually doing that more often, those businesses at the bottom start to learn very quickly. And very quickly they become a competitor to the incumbents. But by the time they notice, it's too late, right? So when anybody says disruptive innovation to you, think that it's how little companies beat big companies, okay? So I actually think in the case of Google, and I don't have any clear information on this or any direct information on this, but I think the impression that I get from what Google was is they had this already. And they were sitting on it and saying, yeah, we don't know how that's going to pan out, right? So let's just sit on it, right? And then OpenAI has come in and said YOLO and just released it, right? Because if they didn't, then someone else was going to, okay? So I think that's a different dynamic than a disruptive innovation. I think that not to pick on consulting, right? But they probably are next off the rank. Like the accountants got scared enough by Xero, right? And QuickBooks and those sorts of things. But with the consulting stuff, probably won't compete for the customers they currently have, right? They're not going to buy it. They have the relationships. They understand it. They've got a lot of time and effort invested in that. It's for the other, say, 200 million companies globally that can't afford a top-tier consulting firm. They'll start using something that's really cheap. And it'll get more data back about how well it's going, and it'll get better tons quicker, and then all of a sudden, it would be better than anything else, right? All of a sudden. But it's all of a sudden because nobody cared about it until they did care about it, and by the time they cared about it, it was too late. So I think there's a big opportunity around that with the machine learning stuff, right? Because it lives and breathes on data and a really low cost, marginal cost of execution, which means it's going to learn very quickly, which is a positive feedback loop, right? So that's my very nerdy answer to that question.
You don't think that they didn't release it because they couldn't work out how to put AdWords in it?
I think that they knew that if they released it, they would have started a run like this, and they probably weren't ready for that run. And I would have imagined that strategically they were trying to work out what to do with that when it did turn up. And so that's why there's an advantage to the first mover, which is OpenAI, which, there's a lot of money from a gradually more opening up company, which is Microsoft, into that now. And so parts of GPT are open, and parts of ChatGPT are open, and parts of ChatGPT aren't open. So I think we're seeing an interesting transition from something that was about lifting everybody up to someone who's lifting Microsoft up a bit more. But who knows?
Staying on search, maybe to you, Marcus, I think one thing that when I'm talking to people about this technology that I often hear, which is a misconception, is that it's drawing from some knowledge bank, that it's actually reaching into some index and retrieving the information. That's not the case, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's not going to Wikipedia in real time to grab answers and to answer your questions. But yeah, I guess the interface is so simple, and so like the Google search interface, it's also very simple. People start using it and it gives you a similar experience, and the internet's always there, right? So I think people it's natural to make that mistake. But yes, it's not doing that, it's doing predictive text, essentially. So
it's a good moment to segue into reality, which is probably where many people want us to spend a little bit of time. On that, obviously we've seen the Bing demo. We saw Google's Bard demo, which is probably the worst name for a chatbot I've ever heard. But it also managed to lose $150 billion off their market cap when it made a mistake. Bing's demo has had similar issues with what we would call hallucinations, but really errors in the response. Do you think that there is a clear path forward to resolve some of those challenges and to actually create a service that is worthy of a chat interface, a search replacement, or do you think that's further off than we think?
I think that's a very difficult one, and it sort of comes back to what you said previously, the way people engage with this and the way they sort of think about what's going on underneath the hood. I sort of wonder what kind of basis we have for evaluating models like this, and often see people sort of, I think, are very keen to play with it for 5 minutes and form an opinion, which often becomes this thing's hopeless because it got one thing wrong that I asked, versus or this is a miracle, we have AGI or something. So, but yes, I mean I think integration with search is probably going to happen very quickly. Getting it right is going to be hard.
In your research, you've done quite a bit on benchmarking of models. Do you think we have a good framework for benchmarking generative models? And if so, what is it? So you can tell me.
There's definitely good science around benchmarking generative models. And generative models are not a new thing. They go way back in statistics. But the types of generative models that we're talking about here that have 170 billion parameters or something like that could only be trained once with one experiment, and it seems to have converged to a good solution. The evaluation of this stuff is it's almost non-existent. And the evaluation is we've built it, it seems to work well. We've trained it once, we can't tell you anything, and it's sort of, in the education space, it was interesting because ChatGPT arrived, people started panicking, and then quite quickly, some people from a US university declared they had a tool that could detect whether text was generated by ChatGPT, and as if this was going to be the solution to all our problems with assessment, right? Because now we have a tool that can detect whether the student's assignment was written by them or written by ChatGPT. But then my first thought on that was, well, how have we evaluated the quality of the tool that tells you whether it's plagiarism or not? I mean, does this thing have a high false positive rate? Until we know things like that, we really shouldn't be starting to use these things to penalise students or accuse students of plagiarism.
Belinda, picking up on that point and heading towards, if these technologies are, going to be deployed in industry, then many of those industries might be regulated if it's been deployed in, say for, simple financial advice in APRA or being used in the healthcare setting. We're dealing with the TGA. How do you think, do you think regulators are ready for this technology? And B, how do you think they will look at it, or what do you think they will be looking for as they approach these technologies being built into their areas of influence?
Might be some work in there for us, I think. I think they need to be skeptical and be really risk adverse when they're looking at implementing anything like this. And obviously we recommend having stringent controls in place, around technical implementations, which is standard, right? There's always ways around getting through challenges of using these kind of tools. A friend told me recently, they're a teacher, and the innovative ways that kids get around these plagiarism tests, I'll give you a few tips. They insert letters next to words and put them in white font. You probably know about that one. I was like, wow, that's really cool. They should come work for us. But yeah, I just think, I think integrating amazing technology like this needs to be thought through, and it needs to have checks and balances and, a robust testing process.
Peter, from the innovator's point of view, is this a technology that can even be slowed down by regulation, or is this an Uber that's going to keep rolling no matter what we try and do?
I'll leave Uber alone. I need to be able to get home. So I think a lot of this stuff is well out in front of the regulation. It's well out in front of the legislation. A lot of the AI stuff's well out in front of academia. Right? And we were talking about this before, part of it is because one of the big problems with academia is being funded. If you're selling an extra $1 billion this month because you've tuned your model and you get that right once a month, you might get 10% of that back to play with, right? So that really is another positive feedback loop that brings a lot of people focusing on this problem. And I don't know who the quote's for, but the greatest minds of our generation is working on how to get people to click on ads more often, right? So that's the sort of feedback loop we end up in. So the question again, Nick, sorry?
The question was, can it be slowed down?
I don't think I think the genie's out of the bottle, right? So the question is, how do we handle that and how do we adjust? And I think that the way that we adjust is as consumers, we critically analyse everything that we see. And if you've seen me present before, that's basically all I prattle on about, is working out how to critically analyse everything that you see. Because ChatGPT basically can hallucinate, right? It'll hallucinate academic references, right? So it'll put something out that looks like it really should be exist, and it's entirely correct that that person would write a paper titled this, but it's not that, right? So I think the more we try and stop this thing to happen, the more that people will find a way around it and try and make it happen anyway. So I think that we need to find a way to coexist, which makes it sound very much like Terminator, right? But it's nowhere near that bad yet. But so we need to work out how to work with it the same way we worked out how to work with calculators, how we learned how to work with Excel, how we learned to have open book exams, let alone open computer exams. Right? I still don't understand how they do open computer exams. So I think we need to find a way to adjust to it. That's probably the best that I've got.
That'll do. I think continuing with some of the challenges in reality, I wanted to touch briefly on the issues of copyright and the ownership both of the model artifact being trained on text or images made by someone else, and also on the output and who owns the output of the model. Two really interesting issues for maybe for the many lawyers in the audience. But yeah, Peter, any thoughts from you, and maybe we'll jump to Belinda on the same topic.
I think that the actual weights that are trained there, I think you can pretty much tie to it to say that people own the product or the effort that they put into that. I think that one's pretty clear. You could argue whether they had the rights to be able to use that input, because remember, GPT's trained off a decent chunk of the internet, right? If we were going to train a super intelligence, what are we going to give them as input? Not encyclopedias, not this. We're going to give them Reddit. And we're going to give them Facebook, we're going to give them 4chan, right? Yeah. We're going to give them all these weird things and say, hey, be more human, right? And the scary thing is that they might actually be that, right? So the question that's really interesting is whether the ChatGPT can actually transfer rights that they never actually owned. Right? Did they own the input, so should they own the output? Right? That's a really interesting question, and definitely more for legal people than me. From the startup point of view, it's like, hey, I've got a cool picture. Right? Shut up, leave me alone. Right? So I think there's and unfortunately the way that our society works with that is that pragmatism of I don't care, but check out how pretty this is, and check out how many subscribers I've got from YouTube, or check out how much money I made selling it. That sort of trumps it. And to the winner goes the spoils, and we'll work out the rest later. Okay? So that's the dynamic that we're sort of participating in. So I think it's going to be an interesting legal question that'll probably get resolved in about 10 years.
Maybe longer, knowing the legal system. Belinda, any thoughts from you on the copyright issues?
This is definitely not my area of expertise.
That's fine.
I think it'll be something that has to be considered, though, of course. I think you'll see some big operators avoiding using it until those points are understood. I think there's opportunity with a local deployment, of something within your own, locality. Using your own information to train, to leverage, a bit more of a targeted tool. But yeah, I can't speak to the IP question.
I'm sure there's going to be many interesting debates. Maybe just we'll go around the panel just on this particular topic. There's a range of sort of interesting intersections of the technology in society, and like we asked the question of what are you getting excited about? Maybe what makes you worried? I mean, for me, it's deepfakes, and particularly pornographic deepfakes of people that didn't consent to that. We're seeing that happen a lot on the internet. I think that's a horrendous arc of this technology. But maybe some others from the panel that you're seeing and concerned about.
This is maybe just a more philosophical, personal view. Like, I heard someone talking about the art of the essay the other day, and I think there's something so beautiful in how novelists and poets put words together. And I think it's sort of not quite understood, but I think, followers of those literatures, writers, they can recognize that language and that work being their own. And so I wonder, what disruption this may have, and maybe it won't. But I think, discouraging our youth to not be writing and putting their thoughts onto the page, I think that would be a real shame.
Completely agree. Marcus?
Yeah, I mean, potential bad things that could happen with tech like this. I'd like to be not too negative, but I can't really, if ChatGPT can be a wonderful assistant, if you like, to help us do a lot of the things that we do around generating text, and similarly image generation models and so on, then anybody who wants to do bad stuff can similarly use them, I think. And unfortunately, I don't see any way of stopping it any more than you can stop somebody picking up a pen and a piece of paper or writing a blog or whatever dark web stuff is out there.
Okay, so who's seen the Idiocracy? Yeah, the movie or documentary, right? Prediction of the future, right? So the thing that scares me is the loss of critical analysis, the loss of independent thought, because I don't need to think about it. I can just ask it; it'll do it for me, right? And that has, in a first order effect, okay, cool, we get a little bit lazier, maybe we can spend more time watching Netflix. That'll probably be generative AI anyway, right? So, okay, cool. But if you start to think about that as a slippery slope, then suddenly nobody's really doing anything new because we don't have to. And then you put on top of that the way that the GPT is trained is by the inputs. So what happens when it's only inputs is its inputs. Right? So it's hallucinating on its own hallucinations. It's those sorts of things that keep me up at night. It's not it's going to turn into the Terminator thing. It's more that we're on this trajectory of finding new stuff and doing things. Something like ChatGPT is a force against that. Right? Now, without getting too much doom and gloom in it, there's plenty of other types of AIs that are doing incredible work into places like chemistry and those sorts of things, or biology, where the grunt work is grunt work, and the output of that will be that we get new drugs and new ways of doing things. Okay, so don't take it all as doom and gloom. It's really only ChatGPT that I think about that negative one. The other ones are really interesting.
I mean, I find it interesting that Peter and Belinda, both of your comments touched on art, through Netflix and through literature, similar, same but different. But I guess it's an issue that I think is particularly interesting. Obviously, these technologies, AI art, is a growing area. We've seen a number of art awards actually won by AI, artists using AI, prompt engineering, if you will, or prompt artistry in this case. But it does pose the question, which is to say, is art generated by AI art? Can it be art? Can an AI actually create art? Peter, to your point, if it's eating its own hallucinations, is that art? Where does it go from being a user instructing prompts to the AI creating the art?
Okay, so one of the, back to the points that were raised before, one of the interesting things about both the text and something like art is it's entirely subjective, right? Who cares it looks pretty? Or who cares it made sense to me, right? So it doesn't have to be anywhere near as precise as it need to be a chemistry or biology or an engineering thing, right? Or even a health thing, especially a health thing, right? Oh, we meant hypo, not high power. How bad, right? Oh, that's a big difference, right? So I think that the advantage of the stuff that we normally consume and the stuff that we normally say is not the realm of computing, right? Is that art, it's easier to solve because all it has to do is look pretty. It doesn't have to be provably correct as being pretty. Because I think there's a big thing there.
Can I just make a comment? So, I'm a computer scientist, not an artist, so my drawings were never any good. I sort of just think of an image as a big array of pixels. And from that point of view, then there's this space of all possible images, which is just all the RGB values of every pixel on whatever resolution you have. AI seems to be good at generating things out of that space that look good to us, that we like, finding them. Some people kind of go with, seem to think, oh, well, all it's doing really is retrieving things that it was trained on that are sitting somewhere in that space, or maybe a little bit around them, or maybe it's finding something in between two images where people, you know, draw the US presidents in the style of Pixar or something. We're just sort of finding a spot in between them. But AI definitely has, there are algorithms in AI that focus on exploring spaces and going to new places. So it's not, these models are not all going to be constrained by just retrieving things that they were trained on or simply interpolating between them. There'll be exploratory stuff that really pushes it out and discovers new things, I think.
It's a very nice way to end that topic. I think that's all we technically have time for. So we, like I said, we have quite a bit of time aside for audience questions. Queensland AI team, do we have a roaming mic and a roamer with the mic? And if I can get hands up, who has some questions for the panel? Fabulous. We'll get a microphone over to you.
G'day. So the question is probably directed at Peter's response earlier around the idiocracy concept and the ChatGPT leading towards more harm than good. Looking at that through another lens, how does that approach differ from, say, where Google or IMDb sits nowadays with reference to the cultural question, where you go back 20, 30 years, who won that football game then? Who wrote that book? Who was in that movie? Does your perception of that change with the view that nowadays people don't really know as much general trivia as they used to, as long as they know how to find it?
Yeah, okay. So first up, I agree with you on the death of the pub argument. They used to go for 2 hours. Now they're just the first person to go to Google says, no, that's the answer. Fair enough. Right, you move on, right? So I think there's that there. I think when you're talking about trivia, though, they're facts. So they're actual things that are true and provably true and recorded somewhere. Whereas when we're talking about some of this generative stuff, it's more a hallucination that's based on the average or a model that's derived from reading nearly everything, or as much as we can get our hands on. So I think it's a little bit of a different game. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, it's sort of along the same sort of vein I was thinking with it. It's not known if it's good or bad just yet. It's just things are different.
I think it's neutral. I think technology is always neutral. And the other one that I saw was it's not a superpower if it can't be used for evil, right? Which is an interesting one. And then you run through all the comic and it's like, yeah, it's true, right? So, I think it's an important tool. I think it's definitely something we need to keep doing. I think we need to keep our eye on it, though. And the trick is that it's not necessarily first order effects; it's second and third and fourth and nth order effects that we can't see coming, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Has everybody seen the movie Dune? Has anybody read the novel?
There's a Butlerian jihad question coming.
Yeah, basically, what do you think the probability of the backstory of Dune, in which the likes of Marcus and all who are like him are comprehensively banned? So it's not obvious in the movie, but one of the things that Dune, if you read the novel, says is that computation was literally prohibited.
By computers?
No, by humans.
No, Marcus is cool because he'd be Mentat.
No, he's gone. Like, you're not allowed to compute.
We've got different interpretations of the book, right? The Mentats are basically human computers because they trust.
No, yeah, okay. Yeah. You can have a Mentat, but you can't have a machine.
Yeah,
so thou shalt not make
cool.
a machine that can compute.
Right? Yeah. So I think, that talks about, it's sort of a way of talking about a singularity moment, and they have to recover from a singularity moment where some, not necessarily evil AI, But a dispassionate, very clean, this is how it has to work because it's much more efficient AI turns up. And then it gets a little bit megalomania, right? So I think, I don't think we're at risk of that, mainly because we've got cautionary tales. Yeah. But I'd like to pass it on a bit as well.
I don't have anything. I've just been judged in many ways, so. I can't comment on June specifically.
Testing. So I'm here as a representative of the End of World School of Thought. You know, you're going to have a few more years of this level of discussion, and then it's out of human hands. So, you know, there's a handful of people, mostly in Silicon Valley, trying to deal with that problem by trying to identify cognitive architectures and value systems such that when you had AI irretrievably surpass human control because it's smarter than the human race, but we're still capable of some kind of friendly coexistence with it. But one way or another, we're talking about a world order which is governed by AI, not by humans using AI, but AI. So to me, I think that's the logical expectation. I've been expecting that for 25 years. Obviously, other people disagree. But I wanted to throw that out there because I think this is in the back of a lot of people's heads, but it's a very hard thing to discuss reasonably. So if anyone does have a comment on that scenario, that's what I'd like to hear.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I share your concerns, big picture. And ChatGPT, I mean, this stuff feels like an awfully big step towards something that's really AI. But I think there's some significant obstacles. Maybe the biggest one is the whole embodiment thing, that the world that we live in is this real physical world that we perceive through our senses, and you know, that we exist in this spot right now. AI, I mean, ChatGPT cannot be something like this, I don't think. Right. So yes, and robotics and drones and so on is something that comes into this. Yeah, I think the main thing I would say about issues like this is please don't leave this to the computer scientists, because we don't know what we're doing. A proper discussion about this stuff has to involve neuroscientists, psychologists, philosophers, maybe some engineers, maybe some computer scientists on the side somewhere, but you know, this is truly like a kind of grand challenge that can only be solved by something interdisciplinary on a scale that I don't think we've ever tackled a problem at before.
So there's a couple of things on our side that'll help us out. First up, it's a non-stationary problem, right? So the value of the space that we're moving into, so the solution we need to do, changes in a way that's not easy to model, right? And not easy for AIs to model. So we're kind of defended a little bit there. And the other one is that we're not doing the online learning stuff yet. Right now, the online learning stuff will come soon when compute gets good enough to be able to continually update. Yeah. So I totally get where you're coming from, but I think we've got other questions though that we need to move through. That's there, but yeah, it's interesting. But I think the important bit is that we hear those voices coming out like yours, right? And we calm them down a bit, right? Because you're getting attention through superlatives, which reads like Westworld, Not so much Dune, but very much Westworld, and maybe even The Matrix, right? But there is a real thing there. But like I said, the nice thing that we've got is we have those cautionary tales, right? Which you'd argue, which is the value of the science fiction stuff, where we get to see how this dynamic comes out, especially with things like Asimov's, like the 3 laws for the robotics stuff, right? So that's been thought about in the general public, right? And then we can start to recognize when it's happened, which is why I get concerned about the loss of critical thought. Yep.
Hi. My question's probably a toned-down version of that somewhat. But what about, let's say in the next 10 years, what do you think the chances are of something that could at least potentially replace any knowledge worker? Anyone who works on a computer could work from home sort of thing, and has the level of, essentially AGI without the motion. And will that come before we can get a robot that could make us a cup of tea? And the other thing is, what's going on in Australia? Is there anyone in Australia working in large language models kind of thing?
I can take the end bit, and I'm probably going to forget some colleague of mine somewhere. But I don't think there's not a lot of research in large language models specifically in Australia. If you're thinking about the underlying tech, there's certainly lots of interest around it. For example, at UQ, Janet Wiles is a professor there, and some of her colleagues have been doing a lot of stuff around language models for languages that are rare and languages that are being lost, like Indigenous languages and stuff like that. But that's perhaps a little bit different to what you were thinking. The first part of what you said, I actually think yes. It's probably very likely that large language models or AI can almost completely, if not completely, replace knowledge workers within the next 10 years.
Once we do that, though, there's an implication that means the end of work for people who think about stuff. It's just, no, you're not going to think about the stuff that you're currently doing. You're going to be thinking about other things. So that's how you'd redeploy those resources, right? So I think, rather than thinking of it as doom and gloom, think about it as, okay, well, what comes after that, right? So, and what sort of insights will we be looking for? If we've got a magic tool that can answer anything that we need, based on having read the entire corpus of that particular field we're talking about, we can ask it a good question, right? So as much as I hate saying this is the prompt engineering, not as how do I get more clicks on YouTube, but the prompt engineering as asking really good questions of something with infinite knowledge, right, will help a lot. Now the other bit, just coming back to a bit that I said before, a big advantage is that it's a non-stationary problem, right? So that the solution or the problems that we're having depends not only on where we are now, but where we've always been. So we're on this sort of trajectory here. So it doesn't mean that once you've solved this problem once, it's going to be the same solution is going to be valuable in the future, right? So that the space we said we weren't going to talk about latent spaces, but you started it, right? So the space that we're sort of going in of all the solutions that we could possibly do, we're here now because of, and it's valuable because of the way things are set up, the way we actually operate, the way we do work. When that changes, it doesn't mean that there's no space, it just means that it's moved somewhere else. So something else is going to become more valuable, right? So the job may disappear, but there'll still be work. There'll still be things to do. And what's coming through my mind the whole time here is Star Trek, right? Again, leaning on science fiction to sort of communicate it, is that there's people out exploring the universe, right? There's people building new engine, there's people doing all sorts of stuff, and there's people just sitting there on a beach sipping margaritas, right? That's fine. So it's not the end of everything, it's just the end of what we probably do as work, which it's kind of hard to be upset about that.
I might just add to that quickly. I would suggest that the downfall of the knowledge worker has been happening for centuries. Like as our knowledge increases and increase in technology and tools, I think just those knowledge workers turn their minds to new ways of using the knowledge that might be fast-tracked using these tools. So I think this is something that we're used to.
I was just going to add that, knowledge work, you can have an agreed upon term defined in law, yet lawyers will still bicker about how that is represented in a contract. So that ain't going away. But also on teams that are working on LLMs, there's a heap of startups in Australia. Big shout, not so much LLMs, but big shout out to the Mawson crew. They've been doing generative AI long before it was cool and sexy. At MK, we've been working on LLMs since before we called them LLMs. And I'm looking at Michael because we had one many years ago spitting out gibberish about council collections or something. There was lots of fun. It was total gibberish. But there is a lot going on, and I think this is an interesting point. We talked about this earlier as well. That there's traditionally you would expect a lot of these innovations to come out of academia, and actually we're seeing that the research powerhouses of Google, OpenAI, Meta, Hugging Face, these are the people that have pushed this field forwards, and I think that's an interesting question for academia to say, how did we fuck this up? So that's one for us to ponder. Maybe the next question.
You guys are really making me work for this.
Thanks. Slightly more technical question. When GPT-3 came out, I think it was 2020, about 175 or so billion parameters. We know that ChatGPT, essentially 3.5, was only a handful of billion more parameters compared to the leap between 2 and 3. And there was, I think some of the writing about it has been that the efficacy in the model around the neural network has basically improved a lot. And going forward, I was just curious to hear from the panel about the transition to the next few versions of ChatGPT. Will it be like a sort of an Alpha 0, Alpha Go sort of style evolution?
Wow, that's a great question. It's very difficult to say much about these models because they're so big, and the amount of training and compute that's required to train one of these things is kind of incredible and out of reach of most of us. So, I think my guess is the rule of thumb for them would be if we can afford to train a larger model, then we will, because larger basically seems to make it better. That's the way deep learning has been, that's the main thing deep learning has been riding on for the last 10 or 15 years. But you make it bigger, it takes longer to train. So are you willing to wait to occupy the AI servers for, OpenAI servers for a month or 2 months? Or do you have to sort of, yeah, and then there's that as well, right? I'd sort of wonder if maybe they just got lucky with a good run, and maybe the Bing one or the Google one, they didn't have such a good run, but so you just need to retrain it. It just unfortunately takes another month to do that. So yeah, I'm not sure. I think what dictates the future of the architecture might be constraints like how much time are we willing to spend training it? If we make it a bit bigger, can we fit it in memory? Things like that.
I guess when you're talking about improvements in these models, there's a few major parameters. Use the word again that you can tune, right? So obviously you can dial up the parameters of your existing architecture, and theoretically, if that architecture does scale, then that will hold more information than one with smaller. You can also change the architecture. So obviously, LLMs are premeditated on an idea. Well, they're really, long short-term memory models which allow you to process sequences, and then we were like, oh, that's like exploding memory problems. So we worked out this attention mechanism thing, and then we're like, let's just give it a bunch of attention heads. And so that was architectural algorithmic improvement that allowed us to do that. So if you took a feed-forward neural network from 2015 and scaled it up to 175 billion parameters, it would suck. We will see, both improvements architecturally and improvements in the number of parameters. You can also change the training regime. So a lot of these, GPT is trained on a mask, right? A stochastic mask, so you drop words and you predict those words and you do that iteratively many billions of times. But there might be a better way to train these models than that. There might be a better training regime. And in fact, when you look at GPT 3.5, your comment was exactly right, that it hasn't changed much. It is the same architecture as 3, it's the same training data as 3, but it's a different training regime. So we do a fine-tuning step on a whole lot of question and answers is what they do. So they take that model and they fine-tune it towards a question answering model, and then there's some, then they rank those and they build a PPO agent that, then does a bunch of stuff that, can build a really big data set of question and answers and gives it nice feedback. But actually, interestingly, there's nothing algorithmically in the whole of ChatGPT that's novel. The RL is old school, like it's really simple. The fine-tuning is exactly how you fine-tune GPT. And in fact, Altman, when asked this, someone said, look, you released GPT-3 in 2020, why did it take so long? And he said, honestly, we just want to be a model provider. We thought someone else would build this with our stuff. We'll see. The point I'm trying to make is we're going to see parameters go right up. GPT-4 they're saying is a factor or more larger. We're going to see algorithmic improvements, which will hopefully bring parameters down, because the more parameters, the harder it is to train, the harder it is to compute. So actually we want to see it come the other way. And if you look at things like Distilbert, and there's a whole lot of work in making these things more efficient, and we will see novel training regimes like what we saw with ChatGPT or GPT 3.5, which will also improve the quality of these models.
I'd really like to see us move away from something that's basically predictive text on steroids. So the way to simply think about it is that it's having a look at how everybody talks about everything from using the internet as a case, okay? And then it's doing predictive text over that. Now, it's doing a lot of work to do it. It's working very hard to do it, but it comes back to the big bugbear of a lot of the machine learning and AI stuff is explainability, right? So GPT is unexplainable. I feel pretty comfortable saying that, right? How does it work? Nothing. And this comes back to its use, especially in the risk stuff that you were talking about before, is, okay, cool, if we're going to use it, tell me how it works. Well, I can't, right? So I think we've got to find some things that are more towards being able to explain it, right? Not because that makes the maths easier, it'll make the maths tons harder, it'll send compute through the roof, and it'll cost a whole bunch more to do, but it'll suit the market better, and it'll also probably progress science better, because then we can look at it and probably mine it, right? I remember looking at a lot of the machine learning stuff really early, back when I was doing engineering, right? And we always thought that maybe the first few layers would be doing a fast Fourier transform for us. So put a waveform in, get a fast Fourier transform out, and then it does stuff on that. We've already got a really good algorithm for that. Why are we making it do it, right? So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we can play with around that. I think that we're lucked out with transformers. It's just a model that scales pretty well, and we have the compute at the right time. We have a non-nerd question, please.
I'm just listening to all this, and having been playing around in this space since they invented the internet, probably just about, what I'm interested in is, we're all talking as though how it will affect still and the possibilities within the world we're living in. What I've noticed, say, with interactive communication, there's still a war on about whether we have hierarchies of autocratic power, you'll notice in Australia, or whether we actually have, people make decisions via internet. And one of the things I'm really amazed at, because my field was always looking at the psychology and the anthropology of the technology, is what are the possibilities for completely different architecture that maybe is place-based and helps us analyse how different people make different decisions and talk about the same thing, instead of us always having to go to war to prove we're right. Seems to me it's got huge potential
So, good question, right? I think that being able to ask something like ChatGPT a question and say, give me this person's answer without having to speak to that person. So being able to understand and communicate that way and learn independently and not at a social risk and not at the risk of embarrassing myself, so I can ask stupid questions. I may well get ads show up about my stupid questions, but I still can ask stupid questions and I can learn there, which will hopefully build empathy for other people's position. So I think it becomes a really interesting tool in that way of learning. Yeah, that way of learning and understanding. And in that sense, then it being something that's static, like don't ask it questions about 2023 onwards, those sorts of things, actually doesn't really matter, right? It becomes a really interesting learning tool. The bit I get nervous about that is the way that it likes to hallucinate, right? It'll make things up, and if you're not critically analysing what you're hearing, then you will believe the lie. And the way humans' heads work is it's hearing the lie, it's very easy to believe it to start with, it's very hard to change it to the right thing. So we tend to stick to our first impression. Yeah, definitely. But I think it's useful as a tool in that way. And that's worth thinking about using it.
I'll just add something to that. I think that point really raises the concerns around or the risks around bias. And like we've seen bias appearing in a lot of machine learning algorithms. And that really comes from how they're trained, and understanding that and being comfortable that bias isn't coming into that training, which I'm not quite sure how we do. That's really important, right? Like we don't want, people learning things that, learning about culture maybe, and they're not really getting, the facts. They're getting the facts as as thought by most of the content on the internet. So I think that's interesting. I think it will be interesting maybe studying people's interactions with and responses to technology like this and how it changes how they operate, how they socialize. I think, I'm hoping my young kids don't grow up having less conversations because of technology like this. So I think that that side of things, the psychology, is going to be really interesting, hopefully not bad. But yeah, something to keep an eye on.
Hi. Okay, so I'm just a high school teacher, but I teach senior business. And one thing that I know my students would kick me if I don't ask is, instead of all of this industries we're saying, oh no, awful, I want to know the industries that you think are going to thrive because of this.
It's a great question. I think, I could maybe speak to what I think I would want my kids, focusing on, and there's certainly industries that I would be saying don't follow that path. I think being technology savvy is always going to be in the future. I think there's things that don't go away, like, people problems, health, science. It's a great question though. I think you'll see developments in all industries, and it will be the people that move fast and think, a few steps ahead in how they're going to leverage this kind of technology, and you'll see a shift in the big players, I think. And I think the big players won't be able to move as fast as the, emerging, startups and smaller companies that can pivot and change quickly. So I think there might be a shift from the top.
Maybe I'm happy to jump in there and add a few. To me, and spending a lot of time in watching people adopt AI or build AI, there's so many jobs that are not going to go away, right? There are lots. people jobs, aged care, health, lots. But what really will separate, I think, your students from the rest is the ability to bridge from whatever industry and career they've chosen to the opportunities of technology to change and improve that career. And that's probably the biggest gap I see in boardrooms, is the inability to imagine what's possible with the technology and to be totally stuck in the way that they see the business working, yet the technology could today, not even worrying about the 5-year, could fundamentally alter every business in the ASX 100 if the boards and leadership had the imagination and the skills and the language to be able to see where that application was. So I think for your students, it's being able to traverse both, whether they're an artist and they know about AI, or whether they want to be in healthcare but they know about AI. It's going to be everywhere, and having that bridge skill will be their superpower.
So first up, no, I'm a high school teacher, right? Yeah, don't do that, right? You don't need to do that. For me, I think it's around the skills they need. So because we can't predict the future perfectly, we don't know what job's going to be perfect, we move up. So rather than trying to find a plan, we work out, well, what do we need? So critical analysis, independent thought, and creativity. So their ability to generate their own information and techniques for how to do that, right? So that's what they need to be doing, which isn't really around learning the content, which may well come back to the assessment question. It's not about being able to regurgitate the content, but I think there is a whole bunch of value in being able to regurgitate the content. I think one of the great mistakes that we've made is stopping people rote learning stuff, right? But I think the ability to look at the context, work out what's right, work out what's wrong, and then work it out for themselves, I think that's a skill that's going to be useful into the future forever.
That's time. So please join me in thanking the amazing panel, Marcus, Peter, and Belinda, for giving up their time. And thank you all for coming out to an in-person event. It's great to see this room full again after many years, and for the excellent questions. There's drinks and pizza, so please hang around and keep the conversation going.